Hello F1 fans, welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with me Vasco, David and Harry, and I can say that F1 is finally back, and in this episode we're going to discuss the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix.
Before we begin, we want to thank Cometric for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you're interested in how media messages impact businesses and what changes a company's image, look for opportunities in the media analysis sphere because Cometric is the right place for you. You can check out their website in the description below.
Let's start off with the practice session. We had some very strange results in all three practice sessions. Very different. We saw in FP1, Daniel Ricciardo topped the session. Then in FP2, we saw Mercedes 1-2. And then in FP3, Carlos Sainz was the fastest driver. So we had really mixed results, and it kind of felt that going into qualifying, it would be very unpredictable.
I think practice was a bit similar to the testing results because we didn't know what was going to happen and who has the fastest car, who has great qualifying pace or great race pace. And I think especially Red Bull and Ferrari, they were hiding their real pace. But I was surprised by the winners because we had three different winners, but when we came to qualifying, I think everything came to place.
Yes, so first of all, in Q1, we saw that Alpine's pace is really bad. They occupied the last row of the grid. Then we were surprised by Haas making it out of Q1. Both of them reached Q2. And the other Q1 eliminations were Logan Sargent and both Stake Zauber cars. And moving on to Q2.
Yeah, in Q2, no major surprises apart from Lance Stroll was eliminated in Q2, but Lance Stroll's never really been that good in qualifying. And we also saw Nico Hülkenberg break into Q3, which was definitely a surprise of the Friday, since the qualifying session was held on Friday. And going into Q3, I still didn't exactly know how the running order would be. We saw Leclerc set a really good time in Q2, which actually proved to be even faster than the pole position time.
In Q3, we had some really interesting results, and especially I want to stress that Hamilton and George Russell had two very different weekends, and everything started from the qualifying session, I think, because George Russell was P3 and Lewis Hamilton was P9, and in the end of the race they were on the almost same positions, and even Lewis Hamilton got lucky because of Oscar Piastri not having the best pit stop and after that having cold tires on the first turn. But yeah, I think it was very different weekend for both Mercedes drivers, and I'm not sure that's going to be a trend throughout the season, but it's certainly a bit concerning, in my opinion, this race about Lewis Hamilton or about the whole Mercedes car, because I'm not sure it is good enough, and I'm not sure that they would want to bring any major upgrades throughout the season because they would most probably focus on the upcoming seasons. So that is why I have some concerns about Mercedes in the future, and especially about Lewis Hamilton, as I think they would prioritize George Russell in the long run throughout the season.
I agree, I can see that coming as well. And we also have to analyze McLaren's performance in qualifying. They were P7 and P8. I think we all expected a little bit more from them and thought that they would have better results because, for example, Alonso was ahead of them. What do you think?
I think that it is not the worst possible result for McLaren, as we know that they're starting the season slowly, usually in this era, and I think that was a great qualifying result for them, and if they can make like a significant upgrades throughout the season, then this is a great stepping point for what is yet to come.
I think we can move on to the race now. We'll recap the top three for you first of all. So we had Max Verstappen taking the win ahead of Sergio Perez in a Red Bull 1-2 with Carlos Sainz rounding out the podium, and we had no DNFs. And if you saw our live show, you would know that Vasco accurately predicted that, right? But yeah, just overall though, a really underwhelming season opener. Honestly, one of the worst ones I've ever seen. There was almost no action. What are you guys' thoughts on it?
Well, I think that I expected much more, and I think it's the same with you. And especially as we had an event, season opener, everybody is super excited because we haven't had Formula One for I think 98 days. And the first race of the season to be that boring without anything to it actually, when the cameraman was showing, for example, the battle for 12th place and having the most interesting moments in the race, Valtteri Bottas having super slow pit stop and the brakes of Ferrari not working quite good enough, well, we can tell that it was not the best race. And can we talk about Ferrari actually? Because I think there were greater expectations for them. And although before this weekend, not a single Ferrari fan would tell you that they hope about something more, I think deep down inside, all the Ferrari fans were positive before the start of the race, as they expected their car to be much closer to Red Bull this time. But actually we end up with Leclerc having brake problems, and overall not the most fulfilling weekend for Ferrari fans.
I would say that there are positives and negatives to this result for Ferrari. I mean, for example, they managed to beat every single other team on track apart from Red Bull. And also the fact that Carlos Sainz was right behind Sergio Perez until the very end. So it kind of proved that they could keep up with the Red Bulls, maybe not one specific Red Bull, that being Max Verstappen, who dominated from start to finish. I think Leclerc's brake issues were very impactful on his performance. He clearly struggled a lot. He was missing the double left-hander almost every lap due to these brake issues. And I feel like if he didn't have those brake issues, he could have definitely challenged for a podium spot just as much as Sainz did. But I don't think this is the worst case scenario for Ferrari, because last season they were much further behind Red Bull, and I think it was a strong sign that they actually set the fastest lap in qualifying, and one of their cars finished within 2.5 seconds of one of the Red Bulls. So I think that Ferrari can be proud with this performance. There is still a long way to go for them if they want to challenge for wins, but it's clear that they are Red Bull's closest competitor, and they seem to be a step ahead of teams like Mercedes and McLaren.
But they're closest competitors to Red Bull, but still they're so far away. I think that's because of the really not impressive pace that we saw from McLaren and Mercedes, and I think that is the reason why Ferrari looks like the closest competitor to Red Bull, not because they have taken that step forward. But moving on to Mercedes and the Mercedes fan here, what was your feeling during the race? Were you disappointed, or it was the thing that you expected?
I was slightly disappointed because I knew that Russell started third. I expected him not to drop that much in the order and that fast. And from what I've read, they had some engine overheating issues. So maybe this is what caused such problems. And I believe this is not their true pace. Maybe they are closer to Ferrari than they were in this race, because if they didn't have these issues, they would be somewhere around them. And I hope that they solve these problems and they actually manage to do something better in Saudi.
But do you think that Mercedes are closer to Ferrari compared to McLaren?
From what we're seeing right now, I think they are in terms of race pace, because McLaren, Norris was ahead of Hamilton indeed, but also because of Hamilton's poor qualifying, I think. And if he had started like P4 or 5, he would have been ahead of Norris surely. So in terms of race pace, I think that Mercedes are currently third, right ahead of McLaren, and maybe they need to make sure to develop their car more, because McLaren, we all know that they're very good in their development throughout the season, so Mercedes have to keep up in order to ensure that they do not finish behind McLaren in the standings.
I would say that Mercedes and McLaren have virtually identical pace. Lando was pretty much within that 2 seconds the entire race behind George Russell, or when he had a train formed behind him. I think that he struggled to progress, but he didn't exactly fall behind either. I also believe that George Russell maximized that car's capabilities. He got overtaken by Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz, who at this point in time are in the quicker cars, so it was expected of them to beat him, and I think 5th place is the best he could have hoped for. Lewis Hamilton made his life difficult with that poor qualifying, but managing to jump Alonso after Alonso's really strange strategy and Oscar Piastri after getting the undercut on him. I think that Mercedes, although not really the result they're looking for in terms of the context of the race, I think it was overall the best they could manage.
Well, I can say that although it was a bit of a boring race, overall, I think there are a lot of things that we should look forward to the next few races in the season. And this is Mercedes and McLaren. How are they going to develop? What is going to be the fastest car? And also we're going to see what's happening with Ferrari, also with Alpine, because there are a lot of problems there. And I'm interested to see actually, because the first race of the season gave me high hopes for Checo Perez, as he was much calmer this time and his qualifying session was a bit better than what we were used to see during the last season, and his overall performance was really good for me. And if he can continue to do this throughout the whole season, I think Checo Perez might keep his seat at Red Bull. I'm not saying anything, I'm just stating that if he's doing that every week, then there won't be any problems for them.
He made a lot of really good overtakes as well. He got George Russell really well and the 2 Ferraris. But his biggest issue is going to be qualifying, because if he can't put it on the front row next to Max Verstappen, there is no chance that he will contest him whatsoever. He finished 22 seconds behind him. Maybe if he wasn't stuck behind the likes of the Ferraris and George Russell, he could have kept the gap closer or even potentially challenged Max, although Max's race pace, even after Perez cleared all the traffic, was still faster. I think that Sergio Perez doesn't really have a realistic shot at fighting Max, but it was a good race, and a race that I hadn't seen from Checo since the start of last season.
Well, I think for Checo, it is his job right now, I think, at Red Bull is not to compete with Max, but to be that safe space at the team, to know that you have a driver who can qualify at least in top 5 or top 4 and be on the podium and have great race. Nobody's expecting him to win, but I think if he gets better at qualifying, he can be that Valtteri Bottas to Lewis Hamilton, and in our case, that Sergio Perez to Max Verstappen. And I think they don't need him to win, actually, but he just needs to have alright races. And I think an overly great race means being on the podium and qualifying in top 4 or top 5.
Speaking of teammate duels, I think we forgot to mention, I want to ask David a quick question. How did you feel when the Ferrari teammates were fighting during the race?
It was very stressful for sure. It was obvious that Sainz had more pace than Leclerc, but Leclerc decided to fight it pretty aggressively. Luckily, there was no contact, but I assume he was frustrated being stuck behind George Russell and having his teammates hassle him all over the back whilst having these brake problems. I think that he didn't need to fight it that hard. It was clear that Sainz had more pace. He could have just focused on the long-term running. But luckily, nothing really major happened, and both of them managed to finish ahead of Russell. So it wasn't that concerning. We saw them fight in Monza last year, and they did not touch. But the way they're fighting, I feel like eventually there could be some fireworks, but not in a good way for Ferrari fans.
Well, there were some fireworks down the grid. We have to discuss what happened with RB, because there were some team orders 2-3 laps before the end when Yuki Tsunoda was ahead of Danny Rick, and they told him to swap positions. And he didn't manage to do so in one whole lap. Danny Rick was not really pleased. Then when he did so, Yuki was complaining all the time that Ricciardo is not faster than him, and he is not helping him actually overtake the Haas ahead. And then after the race, we saw from the replays that Tsunoda attempted a dive bomb at Ricciardo in the cool-down lap. This was childish behavior from Tsunoda. I think that this was really unnecessary. It didn't show professionalism, which is necessary in Formula 1. And Ricciardo just didn't want to comment on the radio. He just kept calm. What did you make of this incident?
I think that was a bit over-exaggerated, because the race was boring, and in the end, the cameraman was looking for something to show because there wasn't anything happening on the grid. But still, I don't think that is an appropriate behavior in the whole team. But I think that's because of the pressure that was put before the season actually to RB, because their car was looking alright, and I think they wanted before the race to fight for points. But during the race, their strategy was not something spectacular, and their whole race we didn't see mesmerizing moments from Tsunoda or Ricciardo, and overall disappointing weekend for them. And that thing in the end, the scandal between Danny Rick and Tsunoda, I think nobody needed that. So I can say that I hope there won't be any problems between the two teammates in the future, but overall I think that was the result from the disappointing weekend overall for Visa Cash App RB.
Another team that had a really disappointing weekend was Alpine. Not only were they dreadful in qualifying, 19th and 20th, but during the race they couldn't beat a single other car on normal pace. They only beat Logan Sargent, who had stopped on track, and Valtteri Bottas, who had a 1-minute pit stop. Really disappointing weekend for them, and it just got even worse as their technical director and their head of aero both resigned post-race. It's just going bad to worse for Alpine, and it's going to be very difficult to recover with just having to completely restructure the team mid-season whilst having to try to develop the car to make it somewhat competitive is going to be a monumental task.
Do you know, it may sound a bit funny, but Alpine, I think, resemble a bit the Bulgarian national team, as they're saying the next year is our year and everything will be better, but in reality everything is going from bad to worse. And the only great thing in this team is that the drivers are talented, in my opinion, but overall the structure in Alpine, the leading roles there, and all the engineers that were involved in creating that car, guys, please, that's not serious from a team that have such high expectations. So I think that it would be very, very long and very, very tiring season for Alpine, but I don't think they can expect anything better from the next season, so they'll be waiting 2026, and yeah, these hopes will forever be alive for them, but again, disappointment.
We move on to our fun rubric. Let's start off with the highlight of the weekend. For me, this was George Russell, as he had a really impressive qualifying, impressive race, and yes.
Mine is Carlos Sainz. He beat Charles Leclerc and had excellent pace and kept up with a Red Bull. One of his best races I've ever seen.
For me, it's also Carlos Sainz, as from the start of the weekend, I saw something in him. He was very dedicated, and I think he deservedly stepped on the podium.
The surprise and disappointments, for me, surprise is Sergio Perez, and disappointment is Alpine, obviously.
For me, surprise, I already mentioned how impressed I am with Carlos Sainz, and I was really disappointed with Fernando Alonso, 6th on the grid. I was expecting him to mix in with the Mercedes and McLarens a little more, but really strange strategy. Pit extremely late the second time and put on another set of hard tires, which really cemented him in that 9th place that he ended up getting.
I'm not sure whether Fernando had another set of softs, but if he didn't have, why did I pit him in the 45th lap, something like that? But my surprise is that Haas were not that bad actually, and they seem to know what was their problem last year with tire degradation, and this season may be better for them. But my disappointment is RB, as I expected much more from them. I expected them to be on par with Aston Martin, for example, but I think they were closer to Alpine rather than being closer to Aston Martin and top 10. But moving on to our predictions for the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. David?
I'll start. I've gone with a little bit more of a chaotic race. First of all, I've gone with a non-Max Verstappen win, even though that seems impossible. He has 8 wins in a row. Saudi, he's not really that great at that track. I don't even think he has... Oh no, he has won there once in 2022. But he does generally struggle to get the victory there. And my other prediction is that there will be at least 3 DNFs. That's a very tricky track. I think that a couple people will get caught off guard.
My prediction is that we'll have a surprising pole winner. I think I was inspired from watching the repeat from Max's lap in 2021 when he made like the perfect lap till the last corner. So I think there would be somebody else who is going to take the pole, but not Max or Charles Leclerc. And if I have to put my money on somebody, that would be either Carlos Sainz or Sergio Perez. And my other prediction is that neither of the Aston Martin cars will reach Q3. And this is just random, but I just feel like it as I saw their performance in Bahrain. I don't think that they have the best cars, so there can be some teams that can capitalize on Aston Martin's weaknesses.
I'm saying that Nico Hülkenberg will get points and that both Ferraris will be on the podium.
That is quite optimistic for Ferrari, of course. And I think this is all for today from us, guys. We're looking forward to the next episode. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us in AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content. And before we finish, we want to thank every single person who attended our first ever event on 2nd of March. We want to say thank you, guys. We really appreciate it, and we hope we can see you on similar event in the future.
Yes, we really appreciate you. Thank you for listening. And remember, if you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.